The sadness that I felt when I was interviewing these participants was, why don't you just leave? Why are you putting up with this? Because now I
Yeah.
can reflect back as an older person. I can look back and I can say, why do these people put up with this environment? Why do they think that they've been to law school and got top marks and been really top students? Why do they think that they have to work in a law firm and that this is their only career choice when they have all of these great skills? They have critical thinking, they have great writing skills, the ability to analyze and assess really complicated information. These are really transferable skills to other industries and professions. And that's the bit that made me sad, I think, when I was interviewing these young people.
Welcome to Legal Off The Leash, the podcast where we take the legal profession out of the box and into a happier, more fulfilling future.
We're your hosts, Elizabeth de Stadler and Scott Simmons, and today's episode is very important, even though you might not know it. We are diving into psychological safety. We're talking to Emma Clarke, a New Zealander based in Amsterdam with a PhD in organisational psychology. We'll forgive you for being from New Zealand, even though I'm South African. After 2 decades in marketing and entrepreneurship, Emma shifted focus to improving workplace culture in high-stress environments, particularly in law. Her groundbreaking research led to the creation of the 3-factor model of psychological safety, and she is now building an AI-powered platform to detect early signs of workplace risk before they lead to harm. She's done deep research on psychological safety in law firms, especially around why lawyers leave. Spoiler alert, it's not just about the money. So psychological safety is not just a buzzword. We're talking about how it actually affects whether lawyers stay or leave their firms, whether they burn out or bounce back, and what leaders are missing when it comes to creating truly healthy workplaces. Emma, welcome to Legal Off The Leash.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. It's great to be here.
So, Emma, why don't we just crack straight in, start at the beginning. Why don't you tell us what is psychological safety and what drew you into this area of research? What made you think psychological safety is the key here, and then why the legal profession?
Okay, so it's important to note that psychological safety is a belief or a perception that people have about their environment. Amy Edmondson is a key figure in psychological safety, and she's a Harvard professor, and she did her PhD on psychological safety in high-performing teams. And she defined it as a belief among team members who trust each other, who respect each other. They feel safe to take interpersonal and intellectual risks, to make mistakes, to voice their concerns without any fear of negative repercussions to their career. Leaders play a really vital role in shaping that type of environment. And so my research was looking at psychological safety and leadership and the role that leaders play in creating this psychologically safe environment. And I had been doing a lot of reading to figure out what topic I wanted to do my PhD on, and speaking to a lot of friends, family, and lawyers, partners. Lots of people in my network, in my friends and family group, had all these stories to tell about their experiences working in law firms. And at the time, I was also reading a lot in the media about Russell McVeagh, and you may or may not know about this. Russell McVeagh is a large law firm in New Zealand, and there were, I think, 5 or 6 young interns, female interns, who had complained about sexual harassment and bullying by 1 or 2 senior partners in the firm. It was essentially swept under the carpet, and 5 years later, it was all in the media. There was a court case, there was an independent investigation, and it was big news, and it affected all of the law firms, in fact, in New Zealand, and the profession as a whole. It also impacted Australia, I believe. So it was a really, really solid case for what happens in a psychologically unsafe environment. What are the outcomes of this type of environment? So that's what got me interested in this topic, and also a really good conversation with my supervisors who supervised my PhD. At that time, there hadn't been any research in the context of legal practice. So I ended up with a supervisor from psychology school, business school, and law school. So it was a multidisciplinary piece of research, and it was at the time something that was unique, hadn't been done before. It seemed like a really good place to investigate psychological safety.
So I have a bit of a follow-up on that. So I do a lot of training around wellness. Am I correct in saying that the relationship between the two is, it's not a direct correlation, but that it's very difficult to be well if you are in a toxic environment? Can you talk a bit about the relationship between those two areas?
Yeah, psychological safety is really about culture. It's about the climate of an organization or even within a team. So wellness, well-being, all those positive outcomes or negative outcomes are correlated to psychological safety and a result of being in a psychologically safe or psychologically unsafe environment. But really, psychological safety is foundational. It's the foundation to culture. It's a foundation to performance, a foundation to well-being, engagement, attention, all of those great things. So without psychological safety, you don't have this good foundation for all those other great outcomes.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's kind of like soil, like the foundation. Very few people have studied law as a career and its impact on culture and individuals. Are there any things about how law firms, and I think it's the same for in-house legal teams, how they are structured or how they work, that makes lawyers particularly vulnerable?
My research was in legal practice. So I was looking at, I surveyed 250 leaders and employees of law firms across New Zealand. And I interviewed 35 leaders, employees, and ex-employees. So it was a very in-depth analysis of legal practice. And really, it was about understanding hierarchy and understanding the impact of the billable hours unit of performance measurement and looking at what I didn't realize, but what was revealed, gender differences and how time is used. So in terms of the structural challenges that legal practice face, you're absolutely right. The structure of these professional services environments where performance is measured by billable hours, where there's a very strict formal hierarchy and where there are gender differences, and how these one-size-fits-all approaches, how they impact individuals by gender, by age, by cultural background. It's a combination of all of those things that have positive or negative impact on the performance of an organization. So it's not one thing in isolation.
And through this, you developed the 3-factor model of psychological safety. Can you walk us through that a bit and, sort of how it does or doesn't show up in law firms?
So in my research, I uncovered that there were these barriers and blind spots. So there's 3 critical factors that need to be understood by an organization, by senior leaders, in order to address and build and foster a psychologically safe environment. And the first one is understanding what the barriers and blind spots are in your organization. The second one is understanding the leadership behaviors that impact psychological safety. And the third one is understanding the resources that you as an employer make available to your employees that help them cope with stress. And so in really high stress, high demand environments like law firms, these resources can be provided to employees and they can be taken away consciously or unconsciously through leader behaviours. It's a combination of these 3 factors, the barriers and the blind spots, the leader behaviours and the resources. These are the 3 critical factors that are important to build psychological safety. And so if an organisation can uncover what those barriers and blind spots are, then their leaders can behave in ways that counteract any negative effects of those barriers, and they can figure out how to map out the resources that might help individuals in the organisation cope with stressful situations. And barriers and blind spots, examples are hierarchy, billable hours, gender and unconscious biases, differing perspectives on why people are leaving. That's quite a major finding, I would say, in my research. Leaders think the reason people are leaving is X. When you talk to employees, they say Y. So there's this really quite big differing perspectives about why people are leaving. And the reason there are differing perspectives is because generally there's an environment where it's not safe to speak up. So when people leave, they don't tell the truth about why they're leaving. So there's these sort of critical barriers that if you understand what they are, then you can educate your leaders to behave in ways that might counteract those barriers.
It's actually a nice segue into my next question. Scott and I often make the statement that it is hard for lawyers to be human at work. And you spoke about it when we started around the definition of psychological safety. The big thing is that lawyers seem to be unable, or they don't feel like they can admit to mistakes. So if you are unable to talk about your mistakes, unable to talk about what you find difficult or what you struggle with, what does that do for a person's well-being?
Yeah, so it has a negative effect on a person's well-being. One of the things that, and I made some notes before we started this podcast, but that was sort of one of the key findings of my research was about role modeling. And in law firms, when leaders role model these behaviors, these psychologically safe, ethical behaviors, when they're fair and honest, and they instill these values within the organization that it's safe to speak up, that it's safe to make mistakes, and when they role model those behaviors and others observe them, then it creates this environment. So the leadership behaviors, the positive role modeling behaviors feed into this psychologically safe workplace. And so it's all linked. And one of the things in law firms which came out in my research is that how people are promoted into these leadership positions, it's really a critical part of improving well-being in law firms. Because if you're promoting people that are billing lots of hours, bringing in lots of new clients, you can do that. That's great. But these people need to be selected and promoted because of their role modeling capabilities, that they're role modeling these positive behaviors and emotional intelligence skills and capabilities. They behave with empathy. They can control their emotions. A number of times I heard in my research about leaders just going mental because something had happened, something had gone wrong, and the partner just went ballistic. Everybody's observing this and seeing that this is what happens if we make a mistake. You know, those kind of negative behaviors, they trickle down. While law firms provide mentoring programs for younger lawyers coming through the ranks, they generally don't provide coaching around emotional skills and managing your emotions, how to behave during stressful situations, empathy, self-awareness, all of these emotional intelligence skills. This is a critical part of what leads to psychological safety and a critical part of what leads to employee well-being outcomes, and whether that's positive or negative. So if you've got leaders in an organization and a law firm that are behaving ethically with fairness, they have emotional intelligence skills and they're role modeling these behaviors, then the positive outcomes are better well-being, better performance, reduced burnout, reduced turnover, all of those great things. So they're all linked. I think the role modeling aspect of what's going on, the dynamics within an organization, is something that's quite hard to teach, but everybody in the lower part of the hierarchy, I guess, is observing and taking on board what the leaders are doing all the time, and it's impacting their well-being and their performance and their turnover. Most leaders aren't even aware of this.
So that's really interesting, because one of the things that you wrote about in the thesis was you weren't just having conversations with lawyers, as in the more junior lawyers, you're having conversations with partners. And you talked about this kind of history repeating itself type thing. Elizabeth, I think you always call it hazing, don't you? Where it's, we went through it, so they should go through it too. We came out the other side stronger so that they can do it as well. So they're repeating the behaviours that they were exposed to. How, from what you observed in those conversations, were you surprised by how easily they just were talking in that kind of manner? And do you think it's easy or difficult for people to see that and change their own behaviour?
I think it's very difficult for people to see it and to change their behaviour. But this is where executive leadership coaching comes in, where coaching around emotional intelligence skills is really important. And what I discovered in my research is that virtually none of the partners in my research had had any formal training through their firm other than individual training that they might have had for specific competencies that they wanted to improve on. So yeah, you're right. It's that self-awareness. Actually, I could be better at controlling my emotions when there is this stressful situation or when something's happened. I need to address this issue quickly and not let it fester. I think a lot of law firm partners don't have those skills and capabilities because they haven't had good role models. But on the other hand, there's a lot of partners that have learnt those skills from role models. And this is what I found in my research. The ones that were behaving ethically, that were creating a psychologically safe environment within their teams, that could control their emotions, they'd learnt it from their leader when they were a junior. So it was very clear the ones who had and the ones who hadn't had good role models. And those role models aren't just in the workplace. Remember, we have role models when we're growing up, when we're children, our parents, all the people around us, teachers, the people that we look up to as we are growing and evolving and becoming an adult, but also once we get into our early 20s and we have our first job and we have different managers and all of these influences are potential role models for our behavior later in life.
This is where Scott and I politely try and give each other turns, but it is incredibly unnatural. I'd like to talk about gender for a second. I find it really interesting that you found this variation, even though you weren't looking for it. Do women leave for different reasons? Do women experience psychological safety in a different way to men?
Yes. So one of the factors in my 3-factor model is the access and availability of resources that help people cope with high stress environments. And in law firms, the way that access to those resources is made available is sort of a one size fits all. Generally, you're given work-life balance, you're given autonomy, you're given leadership support in some organizations. And so what I discovered in my research, which I didn't expect, was that women and men use time differently. So when you combine gender with the billable hours mechanism to measure performance, in general, women have the lion's share of the domestic responsibilities. And this is global research that shows this, and that's the way our society is structured. And so generally women have less time to do their work and men have more time. So when you combine it with this structure, with this hierarchy and with this billable hours, then you're reinforcing the stereotypical pattern of work. And it means that when women take time off because of children or they're caring for someone in the home or whatever it might be, they take time off to have children, they fall behind in terms of getting promoted and pay rises and moving to the top. What happens is, in law firms, is that you're reinforcing the stereotypical pattern of work and men end up getting promoted and staying, and I'm going to use the word trapped, but a lot of men in law firms don't feel trapped, but some men in my research felt trapped because they were paid so well and they were the primary income earner for the family. So they got to partnership and they felt like they couldn't leave. They've made their bed, now they've got to sleep in it. Whereas women had less cultural and social pressure, they felt less cultural and social pressure to stay. So if they were sort of struggling with the workload and they weren't moving ahead in terms of promotions and pay rises because of their other responsibilities, then they felt less pressure to stay. And many, and this is globally in Western context, many women leave their organisation and don't come back. If they come back, they might come back to the law, they might go back to a public sector role or a corporate role, but they generally might not come back to a law firm because the environment and the structure doesn't support how women use time. It was quite an interesting finding and one that I didn't expect, but a very distinct gender differences between how these resources are applied in the workplace and then how women and men access those resources.
I think something that I've noticed that supports what you just sort of sketched is that I see a lot of women retire from their law firm or their in-house role and that they start consulting on their own. Scott, I don't know if yeah, Scott is nodding. He agrees.
Yeah, no, you do. And I think we're going to see more and more and more of that.
Yes. I feel like it's ramping up. And I think it's for the flexibility.
Yes. Yeah. So I think it's ramping up because this next generation that are coming through law school, Gen Alpha, they have different expectations about the workplace and they want work-life balance. They want autonomy. They don't want to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week. They don't necessarily care about how much money they're making. That's not the primary driver. So there's been a shift within our society. So it doesn't just affect law firms, it affects all industries and professions where people are highly skilled, highly paid, and it's high stress.
Right. I don't want to miss the opportunity to bash the billable hour, but we're going to come back to it in a
It's
bit.
his thing. It's like a pinata. He thinks there are sweets in there and he just bashes away.
Yeah, and it's got to find its way into every single episode, no matter what. But I actually want to start this part by the fact that you actually reflected on your own experiences in hierarchical corporate environments. And I just want to read a passage from the thesis, if that's okay, and then we will come on to the question. You wrote, looking back during the course of my interviews with participants in this research, I realized that at the time of my own experiences, I did not have the knowledge, experience, or confidence to recognize what was happening to me or to speak up about it. At the time, when I had negative experiences at work, such as rude, sexist, and discourteous behavior, I felt it was probably only me who was experiencing these events. I interpreted my emotional reaction to these events as an inability to cope and a weakness. If I had reached out to someone, I think my career would have taken a different direction, and my interviews with some employees resonated from that perspective. I read that and I thought I felt the same way as well in my career. I think so many people, Emma, will recognize that in themselves. So as you heard those stories of the lawyers that you were interviewing, you wrote about the fact that you felt sadness for those young lawyers and that it may have influenced your interpretation of events. Looking back now, how much influence do you think it had? And could you talk us through your reflections just a bit more?
How much influence did it have on my PhD findings?
Yeah. How much do you think it did influence the way that you reflected on it?
I hope, Scott, you're not accusing me of bias, right? But I enjoyed reading that as well because there was a remarkable amount of self-awareness, which I think made it moving. I found it moving because no one had articulated it specifically before for me.
Yes. When I was conducting these interviews with some of the young people, the young lawyers, I would say in their 20s and possibly early 30s, I think how it affected the interviews, how my experiences affected the interviews was that I was able to connect with these individuals, with my participants, on a much deeper, more emotional level because I could relate to their experiences. I could relate to what was going on with them. And so it enabled me to get more information from them. I think by having these experiences myself, I think I was able to get more depth, more detail, more nuance out of these individuals who were participating. And they felt more comfortable and they trusted me. This is my perception. I felt that they trusted me and were able to share more depth because they could feel and knew that I understood what they were talking about. But the sadness part that you touched on, the sadness that I felt when I was interviewing these participants was, why don't you just leave? Why are you putting up with this? Because now I can reflect back as an older person. I can look back and I can say, why do these people put up with this environment? Why do they think that they've been to law school and got top marks and been really top students? Why do they think that they have to work in a law firm and that this is their only career choice when they have all of these great skills They have critical thinking, they have great writing skills, the ability to analyze and assess really complicated information. These are really transferable skills to other industries and professions. And that's the bit that made me sad, I think, when I was interviewing these young people. They felt, in some cases, oh, but this is what I've chosen to do for my career, and now I'm in it, and I don't like it, and it's awful, but I can't do anything about it. That's what made me feel sad. When I reflect on that, I left and became self-employed when I was 30 and have been self-employed ever since. And I can't imagine. So when I talk about that it changed the course of my career, it did, because perhaps I would have been in a corporate, perhaps I'd be a senior person in a big corporate now, 20 years later, if I hadn't had the negative experiences that I had. And I really felt for some of these participants in my research and I just wanted to say, but you can't do this as an interviewer, as a researcher. I wanted to say, just leave. So yeah, that's kind of the sadness part, I suppose. And I hope they figure it out.
Well, hopefully they'll be listening to podcast episodes like this that will help them. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because from my own experience, when I was going through law school, it was big law or bust. And I never really wanted to work for a big law firm. So I was kind of, just get him through it and don't worry about him. There is a strong definition of success in the legal profession. And it is very often big law. And in big law, it often does mean long hours, high pressure, high stress, hitting those billable targets, and everything else is secondary to that. You mentioned sort of feeling trapped for cultural, gender reasons. There is also that as well, isn't it? That as you go through law school, there is a definition of success. And although you can see that it is changing, you mention it about how the new generation don't see that in the same way. But I still see on LinkedIn younger lawyers, and I will have conversations with them, and they'll say, if you want to work at a big law firm, this is what you have to accept. And and a lot of them are still okay with it.
Yeah, or they say they're okay with it.
True.
Because that's the environment they're in, where they can't really be honest and authentic about how they really feel. But in an environment where they were talking to me about it, they could be very honest because it was confidential, it was anonymous. They could be very honest about what they felt. When I asked people, so would you talk to your leader about this? Would you talk to HR about this? Oh, no way. They would do nothing. If anything, it would affect my promotion opportunities, my pay rise. There's no way I would mention this.
That's the hierarchical structure that
you just keep your mouth shut. Yeah, and the poor psychological safety. This environment is created by the leadership. So the leadership are role modeling these behaviors, that it's not safe to speak up. Even within the hierarchy of the partnership, so you've got senior partners and junior partners. There's an informal hierarchy within the partnership. And even within that partnership, junior partners don't feel safe to speak up to senior partners. So that dynamic is being role modeled to the juniors all the way through. As soon as they come out of law school in their first job, this is what they see. Unless they go to a law firm where those behaviours are not role modelled. But yeah, you see what I mean? The role modelling aspect of it is really important.
I'm struck again by the fact that how much of it is hereditary, right? So they are imitating the people who were their role models. And so it just gets reinforced and it turns into this is how it always has been. And my experience has been that when people, and I think, as you mentioned, Gen Alpha, it's going to be interesting to see how management changes. But people, if you complain, if you say you don't want to work 80 to 100 hours a week, the word that they use then to discuss you is they'll say you're privileged.
Or lazy.
Yeah. Or they say you can't take the pressure.
Yeah. No wonder we have a mental health crisis.
Really high turnover in legal practice. And a lot of young people leaving and not coming back. They have these programs in law firms, which you'll be aware of, these kind of interventions or wellbeing programs that target individuals. So that individuals have to look after their own wellbeing. This is being role modeled. If you don't feel like you're coping, if you're struggling, then you need to go and talk to someone in the EAP. You need to go and sort that out. whatever that's going on with you, rather than taking this sort of, I guess, systems approach, this looking at these greater structural issues, and rather than placing the responsibility on the individual, they go into a preventative approach to address well-being in a collaborative way. So framing it in a collective, collaborative way rather than an individually focused. Law firms don't tend to focus on the structural issues within their organisation. They focus on individuals.
As it happened, I used this slide, and I just want to read this quote to you. I used this slide in some training, and it says, "The cure for burnout is not self-care. It's all of us caring for one another." And I think that also speaks to, okay, we can't just look at individual health. We have to look at the environment around the person who's struggling.
Absolutely. And also, if you look at all the research from all over the world, these individual-focused well-being interventions don't work. We know from years and years of research that these don't work. The only approach, it's called a primary intervention, and it's looking at the mechanisms within the structure and how that influences the group or the community or the team. And in the case of law firms, it's hierarchy, it's billable hours. These are having a negative impact on the safety of the team. And this is something that's just been shown over and over and over again. Law firms have to be really brave. They really have to step out of their comfort zone if they want to make change, if they want to see better performance, if they want to retain their best talent, if they want to improve well-being and reduce burnout. They have to be really brave. The leadership has to be brave to want to look under the covers and really understand what's going on within their culture. And the only way they can do that is by using a third-party confidential platform or a confidential person, an organisational psychologist who can really get under the surface. And that's where psychological safety is. Also taking that long-term view. And I think a lot of partners in law firms, they're looking at each financial year. And so in my research, none of the law firms reinvest in the future generations of lawyers coming in. They just get to the end of the financial year, split up the profits among the equity partners, and then start from zero. And I thought that was really interesting because that doesn't happen in other industries and professions, as far as I'm aware.
Elizabeth, I feel like that part, this whole section here about it doesn't work when you do it on an individual basis, and law firms have to look under the. I think it's just a fantastic clip, because I genuinely think law firms just think it is about, if you're having a problem,
you must go see someone.
You go and see someone about it, because it's clearly not a law firm problem. It's an individual. It's just an individual problem.
That's why it actually makes it worse, right? So if you have a wellness, or especially if you've got a mental health issue, so burnout is not really classified as a disorder, but it can nudge into genuine mental disorders. Those lists are actually damaging to your mental state, because now you have stuff to feel guilty about, because it says you must exercise every day, and I must eat fucking overnight oats, I must
sleep all of this,
well. And I mean, the very definition, like the diagnostic criteria for burnout is sleep disturbance. So don't tell the person who's already on the road to burnout, you must sleep.
Yeah.
They literally cannot.
Yeah, it comes back to the emotional intelligence of the leader to recognize when somebody in their team is not coping and to address it, and to not just wait until that person is crying at their desk because they've broken down and then approaching them and saying, you need to go and talk to someone because you're not coping. I mean, there's all these signals and things that happen. I talk about in my presentation when I talk about the platform we're developing. I talk about these signals that leaders see all the time, see and hear, and you can ignore them or you can address them. And if you address these signals, you get performance. When you address signals, you get safety. When you get safety, you get performance. Employees often see it, like you say, Elizabeth. If your leader comes to you and says, you need to go and sort this out, take some time off, you need to sort this out. Employees see all of these well-being initiatives that go on within an organization. They see it as tokenistic because it doesn't mean anything. It's not real. It's not authentic. They're just telling me to go and look after myself. They're not trying to help me. If an organization frames it collectively, and if they make modifications in the design, the way that work is designed, and they look at organizational operational systems so that these systems and these processes can reinforce this collective view when looking at well-being solutions, rather than, oh, you're all adults, you have to go and look after yourself. Yeah, it's quite destructive, that cycle.
And by the way, as leaders, we're not going to admit whether we have had these problems, or if we've made mistakes, or if we've gone. This is for
That's
you.
part of the problem.
We don't need it. We didn't need it. We don't need it. This is for you because you're not quite as resilient or anything as us.
Exactly.
So in order to seem like we care, this is for you guys. I can't imagine a place in which, if you're in that environment, you through work go through a process where you go, I'm really struggling. I'm going to go and do something about this. I can't see a place in where that happens at a scale that makes a difference.
I mean, law firms see that as a failure, right, Scott? I mean, I don't know if you agree with that statement. But if you ask for help, it's she can't cope.
It's a weakness seen as failure. It's a weakness. And these are the people who don't get the right support, who aren't in an environment that is conducive to high well-being. These are the people that leave, and they're often really talented individuals, but it's just that the environment is only designed for one group of people. And it appears that most of those people are men. This isn't about male bashing or anything. It's more that the environment and the structure and the way that performance is rewarded benefits people who use time in that way. And those people tend to be, it's a bigger percentage of those people are men.
It's a beautiful segue. Gives me an opportunity to talk about my favourite subject, the billable hour. And I just want to start with 2 quotes from the research. In some of the responses that you got, 2 of the responses that you got from participants, these are 2 quotes from them. I appreciate that billable hours are the work of the legal profession, but just honestly, as a lawyer, if what I'm selling is my time, the message I get indirectly is spend all your waking time working and you'll be deemed successful, right? And then the second one was, in my last performance review, you get a score on these 5 or 6 metrics. And the answer for me, they said, you could have been good this year, but because of your health, we can't give you a good score because you didn't do enough hours in order to earn a good score, which I understood it. I haven't done as many hours as other people. And so that's how they're ranking people. Just a few things. Firstly, I thought it was interesting that both of those quotes came from female participants. You talked about it and how it does favour male lawyers. We talk about helping us out with our health, but actually I've not got a good score because my health meant I didn't make as many hours. Your study shows that this sort of thing is a major driver of stress and turnover of people, but the leadership don't seem to get it. Why don't they get it?
I believe they don't get it because the environment is not psychologically safe, so people are not speaking up when they leave or when they are thinking about leaving. They just leave and they don't tell anybody the real reasons for leaving. So the leadership essentially have no idea of the real reasons why people leave. The partners that I interviewed, many of them said people leave to go overseas, people leave to get a promotion in another law firm, people leave for more money, people leave because they can't handle the pressure, because the workload is too high. Then you talk to employees and they say it was the hierarchy, it was the fact that my performance was measured by hours. They didn't look at the fact that I'm a really good lawyer and I've got great relationships with my clients and I display innovation and creativity in my role. I've got great relationships internally with my team. I can work across multiple areas. I don't know, whatever it was. That stuff wasn't measured as part of their performance, or the individual didn't believe that those factors were taken into account. I just think that leaders are blind. They're blind. That's why I call them blind spots and barriers in my 3-factor model. They're areas that they're not aware of. I don't think they're doing it on purpose. I don't think the leadership are trying to ignore these issues. They genuinely think people are leaving for these other reasons. And it's not unique to the legal profession. This is in IT, This is in cybersecurity, this is in professional services, any high stress, high demand environment where people are paid well, where there's a certain level of education required. This is poor psychological safety is not uncommon. So leaders are unaware of these issues.
I haven't thought about this slow change or no change actually by leaders in law. Sometimes I do think that they did suffer, so that they're not all workaholic psychopaths. But I think what kicks in is this sort of form of confirmation bias, right? Where they go, okay, well, it exists and therefore it must be like this, or they're making meaning out of the bad experiences they had, which is very human. So I always think maybe we should approach them with empathy. We tend to, bash them on LinkedIn and, oh, they're so resistant to change. But I think it's very, very difficult.
Yeah, and I think, they only know what they know. It comes back to this role modeling topic that I talked about before. They can only behave in ways that they've been taught, in ways that they've learned. If they were to behave in ways that counteract what they've learned, if they were to make small changes in the way that they dealt with situations, with negative situations, with stressful situations, if they were to make small changes in their behavior, I think they would see a huge change in the dynamics within the team. So I think you're right, Elizabeth. I think they have experienced all of these negative situations and they're probably unaware that they're passing that on. That culture is being passed on. But I do think if you have awareness of these barriers and these blind spots, you can make small changes to overcome these barriers and these blind spots. And you can create a psychologically safe environment where people will not be afraid to speak up. And certainly the new generation coming through, I think in the Netherlands, they're not afraid to speak up because their parents and potentially their managers and their first jobs as young people growing up, I think they've been encouraged to speak up. Whereas my generation wasn't. So I think it is changing by nature of our society is changing. The way we are bringing up children is changing. And I think that is overflowing into the workplace. And I think in the next 10 years, we'll see a big shift.
Thank heavens.
Yeah, indeed. You mentioned about small changes that can be made. You're actually building something quite cool, a platform that uses AI to spot those early signs of cultural and psychological safety risk. Tell us more about it.
Based on my PhD findings, based on my 3-factor model, we're now building a preventative platform. And this is a platform that digs deep into what's going on in an organization. And this is designed for high stress environments. We're trying to create an AI-powered platform that uses psychology and science, because it's based on my research, to detect these early signs of risk before it turns to harm, before the negative consequences kick in. So it's a preventative tool. And it's going to help leaders understand what are the blind spots in my organization, what are the behaviors that we should be addressing, and what are the resources that we're giving our employees that they're not using to help them cope with stress. And that's what we're building at the moment. It's completely different to competitors who just use survey metrics. Most of these tools that look at psychological safety only use survey level metrics, and surveys miss all the deep preventative insights that are really required for an organization to take action. Our tool will produce an action plan with recommendations about what the organization can do to build a psychologically safe environment.
Not to put pressure on you, when will it be ready?
We are doing a pilot at the moment. The product will be launched in mid-2026. So in the Netherlands, there's a change in the legislation, an amendment to the Workers' Safety Act, which will mean that all organisations with 10 or more employees have to regularly monitor, assess, report and address on psychosocial hazards in the workplace, and that includes poor psychological safety. And at the moment, there are no tools that can really uncover what's going on beneath the surface. They just deliver those surface level metrics. So we're doing a pilot, we're building the product, and I'm hoping that we'll get a grant from the Dutch government in the next couple of weeks, and then we can really get going. But we also want a couple of good pilot customers. I'm hoping we can get law firms because that's where the research was done. But really it applies to any organisation that has high stress and wants to retain talent, wants to improve performance. That's where we're at now. We're an early stage startup.
Yeah, I think it's sorely needed. I must say the Dutch, their approach to burnout is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, she was burnt out, got diagnosed by a doctor, got booked off for 6 months to recuperate. And then you have to go to counseling, and the counselor decides when you are ready to go to work, and then works with you, the employer, to sort of re-engage. That is, while you're getting obviously paid.
Yes.
And that's just...
The employer has to pay your salary for up to 2 years. But one of the ways that I pitch my platform is I say the cost to an organisation with 500 employees, the total salary cost, so their REM, is around 40 million euros per annum. And the cost of burnout, poor performance, poor well-being, unwanted turnover is around 10 to 20%. So that's about 4 million euros per year. And that doesn't take into all the benefits that you get from having high psychological safety. Those are just taking away the costs. And the way we're pitching it is if you use our product, we believe we can reduce that cost by 30% per annum. So that would be around 1.3 million per year that you can save, or that would be the cost benefit. And then that doesn't take into account that you're building this really attractive environment to retain people, to attract great talent, and the performance that would go up as a result.
That's very compelling, but it does require some future planning, which, to circle back to what we said earlier, the law firms live year by year. Are you gonna turn this into a book? Because...
Well, I've written a book, my PhD.
There's a market for it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really exciting, really interesting to see how this product, this platform that we're building, how it evolves, because it's really critical. Who we get for the pilot customers will really inform how the products develop. Obviously, the product is based on my PhD, and so that won't be changing. But the data going into the model, if we can get really good data, then we're going to be able to build this really great platform that's scalable.
Well, if you are willing to have South African candidates, I've got a perfect one for you. So I'm happy to introduce you.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, Scotty, Simon, you go, girl.
No. Elizabeth, you go, boy.
At the end of every show, we ask our guests 4 questions that are designed to get your thoughts on the legal profession as it is today and how it could be, and to give our listeners some ideas about how they could possibly design their legal careers no matter where they are right now. What advice would you give a lawyer who's just starting out in the profession?
Okay, so 2 things. I'm not a lawyer. But the first thing I would say is to take a long-term view about your career. So if you're just starting your career, think about your career in terms of the next 40 years. Don't think in this short window. And I think I would give that same advice from a financial perspective as well. I think people are often taking the short-term view about their career and about their lives and what the steps they should be taking. And I think, so take a long-term view. And the other thing that I would tell young lawyers is your law degree gives you so many skills and capabilities and ability to do so many different things. You don't have to be a lawyer. You can be so many different things. And there are many lawyers who leave the law and go on and have great careers in completely different industries and are very successful.
I would summarize that as saying to young lawyers, this is not a hostage situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
but there's this belief, I think, that comes from law school. That this is what they have to do, and this is the only way. This is the binary way forward. And I think that's wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. What's one thing about the legal profession that you wish would change, and how do you think that change could happen?
I think the hierarchy and the billable hours mechanism of performance measurement should change. So I don't think they necessarily need to remove billable hours. Sorry, Scott. They could keep their billable hours.
No, doesn't matter. Again, I'm in control of.
Of the editing, but just remove that. It is the primary performance measure. Like, why do people have to be measured by time? So that's what I would say. Also, the hierarchy. This formal hierarchical structure creates a really unsafe environment for people. And those are the two things which are linked. Those are the two things that I would change. I don't think they're easy to change, but I think they can be changed through leadership behavior.
What is a common myth about success in the legal profession that you feel should be debunked?
It comes back to the time, being measured by time, billable hours, performance is based on time, and I think that's bullshit.
Here we go.
You know, and I think there's lots of other industries and professions that are measured on time as well. It's not just the legal profession. So I think this is a very old-fashioned way. I think, who was it? Was it Ford? Ford invented the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, 40 hours a week.
Manufacturing job. Yeah.
It's this old kind of way of thinking about things. And if we change that thinking, I think we're going to see huge uplift in performance.
I agree completely. What would it look like if you could design the ideal legal career path?
I think I would go back to law school and I would say to the law schools, why don't they introduce leadership training and skills around leadership, empathy, self-awareness, perhaps some psychology in there, that it's not all about studying the law. Maybe there's these other skills that should be trained really early from day one.
Will it pick up a round of applause? This is a hill I'm willing to die on, especially now with AI. You don't have to read the law, as I said in the old days. You need to learn how to practice it and learn how to manage and learn how to collaborate efficiently in any of those human skills.
Yeah, and communicate with people, right? Communication, critical thinking.
Exactly.
Simplifying complex things and making things simple. I think clients are going to start demanding that their law firms stop charging by the hour and charge them a project fee or a subscription-based fee. I think clients, because they're going to say, but you're using AI. Why should I pay you by the hour?
Watch out now, you're going to trigger Scott, and then we're going to be here until
Yeah, I'm not.
This might be why he's invited me on this podcast in the first place.
No, it's for the psychology stuff. He's throwing me a bone, so to speak.
This is just the icing on the cake.
We'll link to Emma's research and platform in the show notes, so make sure you check those out. In the meantime, Emma, tell a bit about how they can find you, how they can reach you for more information, especially about this platform.
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, Emma Clarke, Clarke, and my consulting business is headspaceconsulting.co. So you can reach out to me via email, LinkedIn, or go to my website.
A big thank you to Emma for coming onto the show and talking to us about psychological safety and its impact in law firms. We've been your hosts, Scott Simmons and Elizabeth Stadler, and this has been Legal Off The Leash.